Good morning, and welcome to the Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. First of all, if you have a cell phone, please turn it off or turn it to mute. I'd like to remind everybody that the ARB hearings are open to the public, and this hearing will be recorded and streamed live. The video recording will be our record of the hearing. We are here to hear the to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for tax roll number 18558. The property is 179 Hubman Landing. Legal description is not on here, but I think the municipal address is sufficient. I will start by introducing the panel and then asking the parties to introduce themselves. To my left is Michelle Ouellette, and to my right is the Council Representative Karen Mara. If the parties, the complainant, could introduce themselves, please.
Karen Boyd. Can I ask you to... My name is Karen Boyd. And with me is David Eckett.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much.
I'm Deanne Bannerman with Benchmark Assessment Consultants. We perform assessments for the town of Canmore.
Thank you. I'll explain our standard hearing procedures and ask for comments in that regard. My name is Martin Buckley. I'm the presiding officer for this panel. Does anybody have any objections to the panel as constituted? Complaints? No? No?
No.
Ms. Bannerman?
No objection.
Okay, I hear no objections. The complainants are the owners of the property, so I don't need that. Ms. Bannerman, can you give us your organization and that, please?
Sure. I work for Benchmark Assessment Consultants, and we do the contracted assessment services for the town of Canmore.
Thank you very much. Okay. The Local Assessment Review Board standard practice is to first have the complainant present all of their evidence, followed by questions from the respondent and then the panel. Following that, the respondent presents their evidence, followed once again by questions from the complainant and then the panel. And then the complainant has an opportunity for rebuttal. And finally, both parties will have an opportunity to present their final arguments and summarize their evidence for the panel, with the complainant presenting first. If anybody needs a break or if a problem comes up, please let the panel know as soon as possible, and we can address those things as we go. I will also take this time to remind everyone to please turn off any mobile devices. Are there any questions regarding the procedure today, or is everybody satisfied with the process as was laid out? Complaints? No questions. Ms. Bannerman?
No questions. No questions.
Thank you. I see both parties have exchanged disclosure evidence before the hearing. To save time, I propose that we mark all these documents for the record now. That won't stop anybody raising questions about admissibility later. If any such questions arise, we will deal with them and strike material from the record later if necessary. Is everybody comfortable with that process? With the complainants? Yes. Fine. Ms. Bannerman? Fine. Okay. Can I have the clerk provide the record of the evidence?
Okay. So we have 4 packages here that have been labeled. We have what we've called the complainant package C1, which is the complaint form, the original complaint form, and that is 7 pages. We have a complaint package C2, which is the complainant disclosure, and that is 10 pages. Complainant package C3, which is the complainant rebuttal, and that is 2 pages. And then we also have the respondent package R1, and that is the respondent disclosure, and you should have 55 pages there.
Thank you very much. Are there any other preliminary issues for the panel to address? Everything's fine? No further issues? All right. We can start the presentations. So if the complainant wishes to present at the podium.
I'm having a hard time hearing for some reason. Echoing around. Perhaps my age has a bit to do with it also. Okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Yep, you're good to go.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Wait.
Hit that.
Are we good?
The red
Okay.
light has to be on.
Pardon me?
The red light, long as the red light's on.
Yeah, I thought the red light would tell me to stop instead of go ahead. That was my problem. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to listen to our reasoning today for complaining about the assessment that we received this year. This is the second time that we've actually complained. We complained last year as well, and so there were some errors in the assessment documentation that the assessor was able to clean up, and we got a new assessment last year. And then this year as well, we were quite surprised that our assessment had increased as much as it had. And so the increase that we had this year was 18%, and the average increase for the 21 properties that we examined was 13%. So when you take that difference of 5 over 13, that's a 38% increase over the average, or higher assessment than over the average increase for the other properties in our neighborhood. And the properties are 21 properties, and the assessor was able to provide us with the documentation on each of those properties, and you'd be familiar with them. They have a picture and the square footage of this and that and the increase and so on. So that's the data that, or some of the data that we used in order to come up with our conclusions today. So 38% increase above the average assessment. And I don't understand why there's such a large increase. And through the process, we asked for to see the calculation from which they determined that we would be $1.515 million for an assessment. And we've been unable to really get any kind of a conclusion or any kind of a formula. It's my thinking that there ought to be some kind of a process where two different people can come up with the same number or pretty close to the same number. But at this point, we don't have any indication of what the calculation was. And so that's really why we're complaining. We don't really understand how we got to 1.515. In the last set of material that we received from the assessor, in the calculation portion, it just gave us a copy of our documentation for the assessment. It didn't give any calculation at all. And as you would know, in the Guide to the Property Assessment and Taxation in Alberta, on page 20, chapter 5, it indicates that taxpayers have a legislated right to know how their assessment is determined. A municipality must provide sufficient information showing how the assessment of a property was prepared. And we've been unable to get that calculation. We've been unable to get anything that would lead us to conclude that this is an appropriate assessment for our property. And so that remains an outstanding question, and I would still, regardless of how this goes today, like to have a copy of how 1.515 of an assessment was prepared for our property. On the basis for the assessment, the assessor included two examples. One was for Starbucks coffee that would show that as you got more coffee in a cup, that the price per ounce decreased. And another one was from Sacramento County in California that dealt with appraisals for different sized houses. And, you know, it showed that the smaller the house, the larger the square foot assessment was, or the appraisal was, and the larger the house, the smaller the appraisal was per square foot. We maintain that these two examples are not useful in understanding how we are assessed in our market in Canmore here. We believe that and I think that this is standard procedure, that the sales data for homes in our neighborhood should dictate where we end up with as an assessment. So we've received 4 comparables from the assessor, comparable sales in our neighborhood. And the larger the house, the higher the assessment per square foot was. And so if we look at Table 1 in the package C2, that sales comparison, price per total finished area per square foot. Yeah, even in that letter that you have right there, it should be on the second page. Is there a table there?
Is it 2024 comparison based on above grade square foot?
Yeah. So that trend line shows that as the house size increases, the assessment per square foot, or the sales price increases per square foot. So the largest house has the largest assessment per square foot. So one option that, or one comment that came up was the law of diminishing returns. And so if there is such a thing as law of diminishing returns, in other words, as the house gets larger, the assessment per square foot declines, we haven't reached that point yet. We're still exploring how high the law of diminishing returns has to be before we kick in. The houses in our area, moving on, were assessed. So from the assessor, we were able to get good documentation on what the properties were in our neighborhood. And so we have 21 properties, and they were all built at the same time. They were all neighborhoods. They're all in the same neighborhood. Similar quality of construction, similar detached structures, meaning none. And this showed that the larger the house, the lower the assessment per square foot. And the sales data says that the larger the house, the higher the sale price per square foot. And so we think that these two things should work in parallel. And if you go to Table 3 in that same document, that just plots all of the properties in our neighborhood, and it shows that as the square footage of the house is, the smaller houses have the highest assessment per square foot, and the largest houses have the lowest assessment per square foot. And this is the exact opposite of the sales data that we were given. So we would like to continue to see how the assessed values were used in the calculation to come up with what our calculation would be, what our assessment would be. And we'd like to understand why the assessment does not reflect the sales data. So we have the sales, as we were talking, the sales data indicates that the larger houses sell for more per square foot. And we believe that the local data should be the data that's used, so that the sales data should be used to compare our house to other houses. Nothing from California, nothing from Starbucks. Like, those are not really insightful or helpful in coming up with a conclusion in this situation. So, as you can see, we have asked that our property be reassessed at a lower rate, and we picked a number of 10% less than the 4 largest houses in the neighborhood. And, you know, we're open to talking about what it could be, but that was the point that we settled on. And we'd also like to understand why our assessment is 38% higher than the average assessment. Let me rephrase that. Why our assessment is higher than the average assessment. So, in conclusion, there's just a couple of items. One, we want to see how our property was assessed and understand that. And if we were to understand that, we might be able to just accept it. I don't know. It's unknown. And then the other item is why is our property assessed or the increase so much higher for our property than it is for the other properties in the neighborhood? And I think that's everything. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions from the panel? Who's led?
I don't have any questions.
No questions? No? Okay. If I could, sir, a couple. Yeah. You started out by saying your assessment had gone up 18% this year,
Yeah.
over 13%.
So
average is 13%.
the average increase was 13% for the properties in our neighborhood, and our increase was 18%. Don't understand why there's such a big difference in our property to the average. And that's for the 21 properties that we have documentation for.
Okay, I draw your attention to that document I refer to, 2024 comparison based on above grade square footage. And for your property, the column indicates the 2023 increase percentage was 15.25%. Can you clarify me how you got to 18?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite catch you.
This chart here,
Yep.
you said 18% earlier on. This chart shows, Karen and David, 15.25%.
That's above grade square foot, and what I'm referring to is the total living area square feet.
Okay. Sure.
How's living area square feet? So this particular chart here. So you can see here, these are the percentages that we're talking about, and this is our property over here. So we're looking, maybe you have an older version. Comparison on house living square feet.
Page 8.
Page 8.
Page 8. C2, page 8.
It just doesn't highlight the percentages, but that's the
But I don't see the percentage. That's,
Sorry.
okay.
This is an updated version, apparently.
No, we have the document apparently, but this doesn't have a percentage, but that one does.
You want to take that?
No, I can't accept it, sir. I can't take it.
Okay, so I have added a column there, and
The other question I had for you, sir, you referenced the sale prices. Do you know if there's any special features in places or where, there's sometimes in some of these transactions, there's
Yeah.
no appliances included, et cetera, because people want to upgrade when they buy?
yeah, Hubman Landing was built in around 2004, 2005.
Yes.
So all of these are kind of to the same spec. Like there were a couple of different developers that built houses out there, but
Yes.
over the years we've been in and out of many of these houses, and I can't. Like maybe somebody now has a sauna in their house that would make a difference, or a hot tub out in the back that might make a difference. But I think those are kind of small items that would cause one to have a different assessment over their neighbor, for example. And there's even a house that's just down the street that's exactly the same as ours, only mirror image. How the developers will do that kind of thing. And now people are starting to redo their kitchens and things like that. But these are just, I think, normal maintenance as time goes on.
Okay, Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for your presentation.
Is that everything?
I have no further questions.
We good?
I believe we're good. Oh, sorry.
I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions.
Okay.
No questions? Okay. Thank you again, sir. All right, we'll turn over to the respondent, Ms. Bannerman, if you could take over.
Sure. So I'm here today to address the complainant's concerns regarding the property assessment of 179 Hubman Landing. The complainant has argued that their property has been overassessed, citing comparisons to recent sales and assessment data of similar properties in the neighborhood. Specifically, their analysis focused on the sales comparison, so that's on page C2, page 2 of their documentation. So there, the complainant is referencing 4 sales, suggesting that the price per square foot increases as the total square footage increases. The second matter I'm going to address is from their C2, page 3, which is the above grade area. They're arguing that smaller properties are assessed at a higher value per square foot compared to larger properties based on their analysis of the neighborhood properties. Number 3, the total finished area, so that's C2, page 4. Similarly, they claim that properties with larger finished areas have lower per square foot assessments, implying that their smaller home has been overvalued. And then the last portion is the lot size. So on C2, page 5, this is where the complainant has performed their analysis based on the lot size, concluding that the smaller lots have been assessed higher per square foot, and cite this as further evidence of an inconsistency in the appraisal methodology. So it's our position that the assessment for 179 Hubman Landing was conducted in full compliance with Alberta's legislative framework, utilizing standard assessment practices rooted in market value and mass appraisal techniques. And now I'll address the key points of the complainant's submission and explain why the assessment should remain unchanged. So on pages 4 through 7 of our submission, so that's R1, we've provided some background on the subject property. You have a photo of the exterior, you have aerial maps, and just some basics information on the assessment summary sheet on page 7, showing the assessment at $1,515,000. So going on to page 8, I'm just going to highlight some of the information here. So the assessment for 179 Hubman Landing has been prepared in accordance with the Municipal Government Act and the matters relating to assessment and taxation regulation. The legislation mandates that property assessments need to be based on market value, which is defined as the most probable price that a willing buyer would pay a willing seller in an open market. The valuation date for the 2023 assessment is July 1st, 2023, and it reflects the physical condition of the property as of December 31st, 2023. So the mass appraisal process is the legally required method for assessing properties in Alberta. The steps for mass appraisal are: properties are stratified into groups of comparable properties, common property characteristics are identified for the properties in each group, and a uniform valuation model is created for each property group. So just to be clear, mass appraisal is distinct from single property appraisal, and it's designed to achieve fairness and consistency across all the properties. And this methodology ensures that assessments reflect market patterns rather than isolated property sales. So the approaches to value for property assessments can be found on pages 9 through 10. The market modified cost approach was used to value all detached and semi-detached residential properties in the town of Canmore for the 2023 assessment. This approach blends both the cost and the sales comparison approach to reflect current market conditions. It begins with the valuation of the land and the improvements based on the cost approach, and then adjusts those values using local sales data to account for market behavior. This hybrid method is the most suitable for the valuation of residential properties in the town of Canmore because it mirrors the actions of buyers and sellers in the marketplace. The respondent asserts that this approach was applied to the subject property and produced an accurate and equitable assessment of $1,515,000. So in preparing the assessment, the assessor analyzed sales data from July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2023. Adjustments were applied to these sales so that they reflect the market conditions of the legislated valuation date of July 1st, 2023. This time-adjusted data, which incorporates typical market conditions, was used to develop the valuation model for the subject and similar properties. A breakdown of the subject properties data is found on page 12 of our submission. And as was noted by the complainant, an interior inspection was conducted on the property in May 2023, and the property was corrected at that time. The property data was corrected at that time. The data characteristics were confirmed by the property owner as accurate, and no changes have been made to the property data since that time. So on page 18, we provide a list of 3 comparable properties that sold during the valuation period. They are similar in location, construction quality, and finishes. The major differences between these properties and the subject property are the lot and the building sizes. Additional details which outline the differences in the property characteristics can be found on pages 23 to 31.
Does that finish your presentation?
No, sorry, I was just waiting to make sure they weren't going to those pages. So the complainant has included one additional sale, so the 198 Hubman Landing, which we've not provided in our submission, although it would still support the assessed value for the subject property. This sale is considered a post facto sale as it transferred through Alberta land titles on September 16th, 2023, which is after the valuation date of July 1st, 2023. The sale was not used in the preparation of the assessments for 2023, nor has it been adjusted to reflect the market conditions of the valuation date during a rapidly increasing market. As such, we ask the board to give limited weight to this sale. Without this sale, the trend line from the complainant's disclosure becomes flat rather than increasing. In addition, the complainant's analysis does not account for differences in the property characteristics between these properties. So when reviewing the information submitted by the complainant regarding the sales in C2, page 10, we can see that there has been no adjustment for the differences in the lot sizes for the sales that were used in this graph. Yet the lot sizes range from 4,190 square feet to 6,113 square feet. In addition, the trend line for the sale price per square foot of the lot size is in the expected direction, whereas where the lot size increases, the sale price per square foot decreases if you're looking at it isolated just on the lot size. But regardless of this, it's impossible to derive any kind of meaningful trends from such a small sample size, and this analysis has no statistical significance. The respondent maintains that the comparable sales provided on page 18 support the assessed value, and that the complainant's alternative valuation methods are not valid because they do not adjust for the key property differences. The complainant's methods are also not valid as they do not take into account the established economic and appraisal principles of economies of scale and the law of diminishing returns. So on pages 14 to 15, we address units of comparison. So using units of comparison in real estate is a common approach to valuing properties by breaking them down into measurable elements such as price per square foot, price per unit, or price per acre. But this method is only reliable when you are comparing almost identical properties. While it's helpful for general comparisons, unit of comparisons do not capture the unique characteristics of individual properties. So this has been summarized well in the Tony Prysa versus the City of Edmonton E-Larb decision in 2013, where the board's decision was stated as the board does not accept the complainant's valuation methods. It is not sufficient to simply take an average per square foot value of neighboring properties and apply that average to the subject without taking into account differing characteristics of the property. Nor is it sufficient to simply apply the same value per square foot to the subject property to the south that is a larger property. Taking an average square foot value of the neighboring property does not take into account any adjustments for features of those neighboring properties which differ from the subject. For example, with respect to size, the board agrees with the respondent that as square footage of a property goes up, the price per square foot will go down. So applying a blanket per square foot value across properties of different sizes does not account for these inherent differences. The mass appraisal process properly considers these factors, considering that the assessment reflects market behavior more accurately than the complainant's suggested approach. So I'd like to explain the economic and appraisal principle of the law of diminishing returns. So it's a standard appraisal principle that states as the larger the property, the lower value per square foot. So as the marginal utility of additional space diminishes, it's not as valuable on a per square foot basis. So the respondent demonstrates that this principle was applied appropriately in the assessment, and that the complainant's attempt to apply a uniform per square foot value across the properties of varying sizes contradicts this well-established principle in property valuation. So the references I've included on pages 48 and 49 are provided to illustrate and simplify the appraisal principle of the law of diminishing returns or economies of scale, which is supported in the prior referenced board decision. So I'm going to just quote that part again. For example, with respect to size, the board agrees with the respondent that as the square footage of a property goes up, the price per square foot will go down. So this is a standard appraisal principle. It exists in all markets, and it was visible through the sales of properties in the town of Canmore, which is why the assessment follows this trend. So on pages 16 to 17, we've plotted the same properties that were provided by the complainant. However, rather than on a per square foot comparison, the plots are for the total assessment. You can see that the relationship is what we would expect to see whereas the size of the living area or lot size increases, the total assessment also increases. So I just want to address the respondent or the complainant's request for the assessment calculation. So we acknowledge that they have requested through the disclosure, their complaint process, they have requested for detailed calculations. But I do want to note that under sections 299 and 300 of the Municipal Government Act, the complainant did not submit the necessary forms or payment to obtain the detailed information on how their assessment was calculated. So I've included the email correspondence between the complainant and the assessor on pages 50 to 53, and specifically the highlighted portions on page 50. And this is where the assessor provided guidance on how to request this information to the municipality on March 28th, 2024. Yet no formal request was made by the complainant, nor were the associated fees paid, which is a requirement of the Town of Canmore fees bylaw. The forms that are required by the town were also attached to this email. This email correspondence also shows that the assessor provided the complainant with the residential ratepayer reports for 22 separate properties, which is far beyond what we would typically provide or be required to provide without charging additional fees. So references to the request for information legislation, so section 299 and 300, can be found on page 36, just for your reference. And one issue that hadn't been addressed through disclosure was that was brought up verbally by the complainant was the percentage change in their assessment compared to their neighbors. Sorry. So I just want to go through on page 13 of our R1. So each property in a municipality must be assessed on an annual basis. This is part of the legislative framework in the MGA in section 298. This has been tested by the boards and the courts. Specifically, I want to draw your attention around mid-page, Globex Properties versus the City of Edmonton, 2012, Alberta Queen's Bench. The court confirmed that neither a prior year's board decision nor a prior year's assessment is a starting point or base for the following assessment year. And just also to highlight that there was a change made in their assessment last year, in the complainant's assessment last year through the complaint process. And sometimes when that happens, they get reduced possibly because we're looking at just the data. They may have gotten reduced possibly higher. than they should have been. So there was more to catch up on when the valuation was done and the model was applied to their property. So just in summary, I submit that the property assessment for 179 Hubman Landing was prepared in a fair and equitable manner. It was following mass appraisal principles as required by Alberta legislation. The complainant's alternative valuation methods are inconsistent with accepted appraisal standards as well as specific market information. And there's a lack of any other credible evidence to demonstrate that the assessment is incorrect. So we'd respectfully request that the board confirms the assessed value of $1,515,000 for the subject property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bannerman. Do the complainants have any questions of Ms. Bannerman?
I have some comments. There we are. Yeah. So the first comment is that the assessor does agree that the sales data should be used for assessment instead of dealing with the theory that at some point you hit the law of diminishing returns. That's all very good, but if that is the case, we have not hit that point where diminishing returns are starting to kick in my view. Larger houses in the sales data were assessed at, or were sold at a higher price per square foot.
Excuse me, sir. I appreciate what you're saying, but I think this is the time for questions of the.
Oh, you want me to ask if she has any
If you have any questions on
Okay.
the presentation, yes, sir, or her material, her evidence.
How was the assessment calculated? And I want to see the formula, if there is one. I want to see the work that was done. You know, just like you were in school when you took a mathematics class and you had to show your work. I want to see that work to understand, and then perhaps this whole thing would go away. But how was the assessment calculated?
Okay, is that all the questions you have for her? Or should I go one at a time?
Yes, that's good enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Bannerman?
Okay, so I believe I addressed that in my presentation. So we had discussed how I had provided the complainant with the information or the resourcing for how to make that kind of a request to the town. As I said, there's a fee associated with that type of detailed information. So they still have the option, if they would like to, request that information through the town with the forms that I previously provided in March of this year.
So she's saying that we have to go through CAMWA to get that? Just a comment is that we have asked for this calculation, I don't know how many times, like half a dozen times in our communications with her, and never once was it mentioned that we should go to Canmore and get it. I thought the assessor would provide that information, and in dealing with that guideline that I was referring to about we have a legislated right to understand how it's calculated, I don't know how it's calculated, and I've never been directed to go to a different source than the assessor. So that's my comment there.
Okay, so I'll refer you again to the material that I have. So on page 50 through 53, I have the email correspondence between the complainant and the assessor. So the complainant being the people presenting today. And I have highlighted the portion where I did specifically reference how to access this information and included the forms on there as well. And I did indicate that there is a fee associated with this information. The forms that I included, although, sorry, I didn't include it in my disclosure, they do have a step-by-step process laying out exactly what the steps are. I can't hear this, sorry.
So, just for your information, I have not seen an email that gave any kind of a step-by-step process. And in her disclosure document, she included just simply the residential rate report. And that's not good enough for me.
You'll have an opportunity to rebut in a moment here, sir. Questions from the board? Ms. Lett?
I don't have any questions.
No questions? Ms. Mara?
I have no questions.
Okay, I have a bunch. Ms. Bannerman, if I could take you to page 12 of your R1, the calculation of property assessment. And you read off on this, an interior inspection was conducted on the subject property in May 2023. Were similar inspections done on the other properties, in particular the comparable properties listed by the complainant at that time?
No, this was a specific inspection that was set up due to the assessment review board complaint that the property owner had at the time.
Okay.
We do conduct regular reinspection programs in the town of Canmore, though, so we have access to all the permitting information, we have access to all the MPLATS information, and we do actually walk the neighborhoods on an annual basis. So if there's anything that looks like there's changes that have been made, then that's the opportunity that we would take to knock on the door.
Okay, so that may answer my next question on pages 14 and 15 of your submission. The reference the City of Edmonton case.
Sure.
Taking an average square foot value of the neighboring property does not take into account any adjustments for features of those neighboring properties which differ from the subject, and you may have spoken on this a little earlier. So if you've done a walkthrough there, did you notice any special features on other properties?
This is referencing, so it's the property data that we have in our system on these properties. So when they were first constructed, we would have had the building plans and we would have determined how many bathrooms they have, the size, the square footage, the lot size, those types of things, the quality of construction. So we would have that information already, and that's what I was referencing when saying unique or special features about the property. So when we're looking at the sales that were provided, we can see that there's a range in lot sizes. There's a range in the properties, living areas, square footage, the basement area. There's also differences in features such as fireplaces, or some have air conditioning, some would have walkout basements versus not walkout. Some would have different number of plumbing fixtures or bathrooms and things like that. So that's more what I'm relating to. So when we're doing the valuation and we're looking at properties, it really goes back to that mass appraisal process. So we're looking at the sales of all sorts of similar properties, but what we're doing is we're extrapolating all the differences out of them. And those differences get their own value. So it really is the differences in the property characteristics that determine the difference in the property assessment, because that same valuation model has been applied to all the properties. So it's the differences in their characteristics that make the difference in the assessment.
Okay. Also on page 15, in the third paragraph down, most evident in the real estate market, where we can see that larger homes have a lesser value per square foot than smaller homes. Is this commonplace throughout Canmore?
It's common everywhere. This isn't a unique thing to Canmore, although Canmore has unique properties. But the economies of scale or diminishing returns, however you want to phrase it. It really is about the utility. So if you look at, say, the Starbucks reference that I put, and I had in my attachment, it really does explain that concept. But when we're looking at the sales, they don't continue to increase exponentially at the same rate. There comes a time when that curve bends a bit, and it's based on the utility. If you only need a 2,000 square foot lot to build a house, and somebody, has a 4,000 square foot lot, and I'm using really extreme smalls here, and somebody has an extra, you have twice as much of the lot that you actually really need. So nobody is going to pay for that additional 2,000 square feet, the same as they would that first 2,000 square feet. That's the same concept. We do see the trend throughout Canmore. It's just a basic standard principle. And it's supported by the sales data in the town of Canmore, including this neighborhood.
Okay. Can I take you to page 20, please, of your summary? And it's just more or less a reaffirmation of what I think you've already said. The methodology used by the complainant to demonstrate that their assessment is incorrect does not follow standardly accepted appraisal principles. Can you clarify that a little bit for me, please?
Yeah, so when I was explaining earlier in my presentation about the economies of scale or diminishing returns, that is a standardly accepted appraisal principle. It's the principle out there. When we're looking, we're not building that principle into our work or into our valuation. That curve occurs when looking at the sales. So I guess it's just this. The information provided by the complainant is in the opposite of what we're seeing for sales and also what we see for standardly accepted appraisal principles. If that explains it.
I believe so, yeah. I don't have any further questions on that one. Pages 21 through 31 are all copies of adjacent property titles.
That's right.
Under the, pardon me?
That's correct.
Yeah. I notice under the various titles, encumbrances, liens, and interests, all of those things, the liens or encumbrances, seem to be commonplace. There was one, I think, that was different. Just give me a second and I'll find it. Page 22, the encumbrance, Chateaus by the Creek Homeowners Association. That seems to be unique to this property. Does that have an effect on the assessment of this property?
No, we haven't seen any noticeable effect of any restrictions on title for anything in this neighborhood. They all have similar restrictions. And without having gone into looking at that specific encumbrance that's on title, if it's different than anybody else, it hasn't restricted the, I wouldn't say that it would restrict any kind of trade in the market.
Okay. If you don't know what the contents of that encumbrance are, though, it could have a value on the appraised value of the property.
Very doubtful. It looks like it is a homeowners association, and it would be something that would affect all of the properties in that area, whether it's on their title or not.
But a buyer wouldn't know that on the other properties.
I would suggest a buyer wouldn't consider that encumbrance as a homeowners association as any detriment to the value of these properties. They're already dealing with common, party walls. They're duplex properties in a similar kind of neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. We've reached the time for the opportunity for rebuttal by the complainants. So your earlier comment, when I cut you off, sir, it's time for that now.
So I agree with the assessor that sales data should be used in assessing the properties. And that means that larger houses now are selling for a higher price per square foot than the smaller houses. And so when we talk about diminishing returns and the theory or concept versus the actual data that we have, I believe we should be using the actual data that we have for sales data instead of a concept or a theory, because if the data is correct, well, the data would be correct, it's showing that we have not reached that point where the law of diminishing returns sets in. And so we're still, I would guess, on that upward scale, so that larger houses are continuing to sell for higher and higher values. And that's, you know, just anecdotally what we see on our street now is that there's been a couple of houses that have gone up for sale since we started this process, and they seem to be going for higher prices, not that we know the detail. So those are the two main points, that we ought to use the sales data, because that is data instead of a concept, which is a theory. And I think that's everything that I have to say for the rebuttal. Thank you. Oh, I have one more item.
Sure.
And the differences in the property, like on each one of the ratepayer reports that we received, they talk about things like heat, forced air, heat extended, plumbing, basement, plumbing, main. And these differences are so small that, you know, I can't imagine how it would affect the sale price of the property. And the assessments, if they're correct, you know, the assessments vary from $725 per square foot for the smallest house to $550 per square foot for the largest house. And how can the differences in the small properties make that big of a difference that the large properties are sold for much less than per square foot than the smaller properties? So the special features that we've seen, in my view, couldn't cause a difference of, you know, a couple of $100 per square foot for the assessment. And I think that's all I have for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So it's still your opportunity if you wish to present a argument, some summation, or you have any further comments?
I think that was my summation.
Okay, thank you. Respondent, your opportunity for a summation.
Okay, I just want to reiterate what I've said earlier. So what I've just heard from the complainant is a question of whether we're using the town of Canmore's actual sales data. I just want to reiterate that we do only use the sales data from the town of Canmore in the preparation of our assessments. I also want to highlight the sales analysis and the spreadsheet or the graph that was done with the 4 sales or 3 sales, depending on whether they're going to be included or not, or have any weight given to them. There's really no reliable statistical trend that can be derived from that small of a sample. I'd say that it's insignificant, and to plot any kind of determination on saying that sale prices per square foot should continue to increase up to a certain point with that limited of data is really irrelevant. It's so insignificant to get any kind of statistical information out of something like that. And I do want to reiterate that even if there was some weight put on that, there's been no adjustments other than square footage of the living area made to that graph. And I want to, again, take the opportunity to say that there's large differences in the lot sizes between those 4 sales that were used in the analysis, which, you know, also it does show that that's a questionable manner in which to base a decision on. So really, I really want to submit that the property assessment for 179 Hubman Landing was prepared in a fair and equitable manner. We followed mass appraisal principles as is required by Alberta legislation. I do believe that the complainant's alternative valuation methods are inconsistent with the accepted appraisal standards, as well as specific market information. And there's a lack of any other credible evidence to demonstrate that the assessment's correct. And it really is the onus of the complainant to prove that their assessment is incorrect, and also to show what the assessment should be. Not a number in the air, but they actually should be able to come with proof to show what their assessment should be if it is incorrect. And so really with all those points, I really respectfully request that the board confirms the assessed value of $1,515,000 for the subject property. Thank you.
Thank you. To the complainants, you have the last word, if you'd like to say anything.
Thank you. I just want to give a compliment to the assessor for a start, in that she was really responsive to us through this whole process. I have not seen a calculation that I could disagree with or agree with. I would like to see that still. You know, next year and the year after that and so on, we're going to have new assessments, and it'd be nice to understand the process that we actually went through to get to 1515. The diminishing returns point, and well, no, the four properties that were sold that are included in the data here, I recognize that there's not 100 properties, but you know, we have to use the data that we have, and that's the data that we have, and that indicates something different from the way the assessments were prepared. So you can see that the larger the property, the more it sells for, the smaller the property, the less it sells for. That's what the trend line indicates. And I think we just have to use that data instead of the concept or theory of the law of diminishing returns. Pardon me. So thank you for your time, and we'll respectfully wait for the conclusion or the result. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I will ask both parties if they feel they've been heard today, the complainants. Do you feel you've had a fair and you've been heard? You have a fair hearing? Yes, you have. Very good. I sympathize with you, sir. I've got the same problem. Ms. Bannerman, feel you have had a fair hearing?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask you again, do you feel you've had a fair hearing?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. All right, I will now declare this hearing closed. No further evidence nor submissions may be received by the board. Thank you all. Safe travels. Okay. I'm going to read the opening and closing remarks that you gave me to start. All right. Good morning and welcome to the Local Assessment Review Board hearing. I would like to remind everyone that the ARB hearings are open to the public and this hearing will be recorded and streamed live. The video recording will be our record of the hearing. We are here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for tax roll number 16486, municipal address of 1124 Wilson Way. The complainant is Michael Pedlow. It is my understanding, Mr. Pedlow, the complainant has indicated he will not be in attendance. So we will proceed with the hearing nonetheless. He's been given the opportunity to be here. There is not really any evidence, but I'll still turn to the clerk to advise as to what has been received.
Yeah, I think you can still go ahead and introduce the panel.
Yes.
And then we can skip.
Then we'll do that. Yeah. Okay. Introducing the panel, to my left is Michelle Ouellette. To my right is Councillor Karen Mara. And again, we have no complainants, so there's no one to be introduced there. My name is Martin Buckley. I'm the presiding officer. There's no one present other than, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Bannerman. Karen Bannerman, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Deanne Bannerman. I'm with Benchmark Assessment Consultants. We perform the contracted assessment services for the town of Canmore.
Thank you. Any objections to the panel?
No.
No? Okay, thank you. Now again, I can ask the clerk to provide evidence. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. And that's that one, right?
Okay. So we have two evidence packages today. The complainant package, which has been labeled as C1, has only the original complaint form, and that is 2 pages. And we have a respondent package, R1. That's the respondent's disclosure at 42 pages.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bannerman, I believe the next step is to ask if you wish to... Yes, any preliminary issues?
I do have one, yes.
Yes, okay. Go ahead.
So my preliminary issue has to do with the complainant not having met onus. So do you want me to go into my presentation now?
You don't need to. You can ask the complaint to be dismissed.
Yeah, so I am asking for the complaint to be dismissed. What I'll do is just briefly go through the information that I've provided in my my disclosure.
Okay.
If that's all right with the board, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm here to respectfully request the dismissal of the complaint regarding the 2023 assessment of the property at 1125 Wilson Way. The assessed value for this property is $1,262,000. The basis for my request for this dismissal is the lack of evidence provided by the complainant, as well as non-compliance with the statutory requirement under the Municipal Government Act and matters relating to assessment complaints regulation. I'll outline the key issues supported by the relevant legislation to demonstrate why the complaint should be dismissed. So on page 3, I've listed my issues. So the first issue is, has the complainant met the onus under section 460(9) of the MGA? So under this section of the MGA, the complainant bears the responsibility or onus to demonstrate how the assessment is incorrect. In this case, the complainant has provided no evidence or supporting documentation to challenge the assessment of $1,262,000. Second issue is, has the complainant met the evidentiary burden of proof under section 460(9)? And the complainant must not only show that the current assessment is incorrect, but they must also provide compelling evidence that the requested value is correct. Without any documentation or argument, the complainant has not met the burden of proof required by the legislation to support their claim. And then the third issue is, should the complaint be dismissed for non-compliance with section 460(9)? The complainant was required to provide disclosure of documentary evidence and any written argument by September 12th, 2024. So if you go, now I'm on page 5. So the complainant was notified of this legislated date from the notice of hearing, which was sent by the Assessment Review Board clerk on July 10th, 2024, and clearly outlined the complainant's responsibility for disclosure timelines. And this can be found on page 37 of our submission. It's important to note that the complainant has failed to submit any evidence or argument by this deadline, either to the Assessment Review Board clerk or to the respondent benchmark assessment consultants. The only information provided was on the original complaint form, which can be found on page 40 of our submission. And I want to highlight that it is the responsibility of the complainant to provide evidence and argument to demonstrate why their assessment is incorrect. Because of this non-compliance, the board must now consider whether to dismiss the complaint under section 467 sub 2 of the MGA. And this section states that an assessment review board must dismiss a complaint that was not made within the proper time date or does not comply with subsection 460 sub 9. And I've listed that section for you as well, but I'll just read it out to you. So section 460 sub 9 states a complaint under subsection 5 must indicate what information shown on the assessment or tax notice is incorrect, explain in what respect that information is incorrect, indicate what the correct information is, and identify the requested assessed value if it's an assessment. The legislative framework makes it clear that complaints should not proceed when there has been a failure to comply with disclosure requirements. So with regards to onus and burden of proof, the law clearly places the onus to prove that an assessment is incorrect on the complainant. This is well-established principle supported by court rulings and adopted by assessment review boards across Alberta. Excerpts for this case law can be found on pages 6 through 10. I won't read it all for you. To meet this onus, the complainant has a multi-step responsibility. First, they must demonstrate that the assessment is incorrect. And second, they must convincingly prove that the requested value is correct. In this case, the complainant has failed on both counts. Without documentary evidence, the board has nothing to base a decision on and no justification to adjust the 2023 assessment. In conclusion, the complainant has not met their responsibilities under section 460 sub 9 of the MGA. They have failed to provide evidence to support their claim that the 2023 assessment of $1,262,000 is incorrect. The onus and burden of proof remain with the complainant, and in this case, both have not been satisfied. Therefore, I respectfully request that the complaint be dismissed under section 467 sub 2 of the MGA for non-compliance with the disclosure requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe this is a situation where we do not need to deliberate. We more or less take a vote on this and just decide whether or not to dismiss. Go ahead. That one? She just pushed clear. Oh, she did. Okay.
Thank you. We would just like to provide clarity for the record. We have discovered an error in the address. It is 1125 Wilson Way.
Yeah, so all the evidence has correctly identified the property as 1125 Wilson Way, and the tax roll is correct. It's just there was a typo for when you were reading it in as the property. We had an error in the address, so just to clarify that for the record, the property in discussion is 1125 Wilson Way.
Okay, thank you. So we take a vote. Do we dismiss this one? All right, you're in favor?
I'm in favor.
All right, so the board will dismiss this complaint for lack of evidence. Where are we here? Yeah, but again, the reasons are stated as to why the complaint is being dismissed. That'll be part of the decision. Yeah. All right. Nothing else? I declare the hearing closed. 10:15. Thank you very much.
Thank you.